Good evening everyone and welcome to our webcast with the Edinburgh, Lothians and Fife District Centre. Tonight we are joined by Nicola Anderson from FinTech Scotland, who will explain what the organisation does, how it's working with the banking industry and the focus of regulation within the sector. I hope you all enjoy today's session, and I will firstly pass you over to Helen Mackay, Chairperson of the District Centre. Over to you, Helen.
And welcome to our local district members and wider CBI membership and CISI members. We're extremely lucky to have our guest speaker this evening, given that it's UK FinTech Week, which kicked off yesterday with some key announcements from Rishi Sunak, our Chancellor. And this will help to support the sector, as well as confirming that investment in the UK FinTech during 2020 was $4.4 billion, which is more than the next 5 European countries combined. There have also been many recommendations on the back of the Khalifa review, which was published earlier this year, which Nicola will touch on, I'm sure. Nicola became the CEO of FinTech Scotland earlier this year, and she joined in 2018 as Strategic Development Director. During that time, she has worked with FinTech SME communities, supporting SMEs in the navigating the regulatory environment, focused on customer outcomes. Our experience in the SME development comes from a variety of industries, including financial services, involves practical understanding across different stages of the business lifecycle, with first-hand entrepreneurial experience from initiating and establishing her own business in the retail sector. Before joining FinTech Scotland, Nicola was part of the FCA's leadership team in the retail banking sector, solutions needed to address industry issues following the financial crisis, which I'm sure many of us still remember. This experience included board and executive level engagement on a number of retail bank transformational changes and complex regulatory issues, working in collaboration with HM Treasury, the Bank of England and other bodies. This just covers a fraction of what Nicola has achieved, but it'll be far more interesting to listen to what she has to say. But before I pass you over, I just want to remind you that Gregor's here tonight to gather up all your questions for the question and answer session at the end. So over to you, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Helen and Heather, and thank you everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening and to talk to you a little bit about FinTech Scotland. So I was appointed as the CEO at FinTech Scotland on the 1st of February, and it's a real privilege to lead this organisation. I'm continually inspired by the people, ambition and the developments and determination from FinTech tech and the business community in Scotland. And we're driving and striving together to make Scotland a global leader in technology innovation, helping FinTech Scotland to become one of those top 5 countries in the world known for FinTech. Helen mentioned at the beginning, a few moments ago, the Khalifa review. The Khalifa review, or the FinTech strategic review, was enabled and commissioned by HM Treasury from last year's budget. The recommendations from that review were published in February this year, and the findings outlined that Scotland was making significant progress in FinTech. And we were highlighted as one of the top 3 areas for FinTech positive development across the UK. So if we moved on to the next slide, please, Heather, I just wanted to spend a moment or two on that subject of FinTech. And what is FinTech? I don't think it will come as a surprise to anyone listening just now. It's at its simplest, it's the use of technology in the delivery of financial services. And it's not something necessarily new in this day and age. But FinTech itself is fast becoming an emerging industry. And it's a powerful combination of technology, data, and innovation to improve activities in finance. It's creating real possibilities for change, and it's seen more and more as driving a positive agenda for change and a progressive disruptor in financial services. And as Helen mentioned, it is UK FinTech Week this week. In reaction and following on from the FinTech Strategic Review or the Khalifa Review, the Chancellor opened FinTech Week yesterday morning. And I've copied here his vision as we set out that opportunity for FinTech and for financial services. And you can see it touches more on an open, greener and technology advanced financial services sector, and a sector that is really driving innovation, addressing real issues for real people. And that's certainly our experience in Scotland. If we move on to the next slide, we think that in Scotland, FinTech, I'm sorry, I don't know if I've lost the slides. Oh, thank you, Heather. So thinking about FinTech in Scotland, let me tell you a little bit about that. FinTech Scotland was established in 2018. And we have the perfect opportunity here in Scotland with our strong financial services heritage, of which I know there are so many great experienced people joining and listening to the call this evening. And I'll be really keen to hear your questions at the end. With that strength in heritage and financial services, with the strength and capability in technology, and the expertise that we're seeing in data and data-driven innovation, and innovation generally as a culture and as a strength within Scotland, we have a real opportunity just to recognise the potential for FinTech in Scotland. And so with that backdrop, FinTech Scotland was established at the beginning of 2018. We have 165 FinTech SMEs within the FinTech Scotland community. And that is a growing number, up from 26 FinTechs as FinTech Scotland first was established. The next slide, I'm just going to start to talk a little bit about FinTech Scotland strategy. I'm sorry, I seem to be having a little bit of technical difficulty, so I'm sorry. Bear with me 1 second, please. Okay, I'm going to say, hopefully that will help us address the situation. The joys of working virtually. And the next time I hope to speak to you all, I hope very much that it'll be in person. So FinTech Scotland is a cluster management organisation. We're here to enable that opportunity that Scotland sees economically and socially through FinTech. And we work across three main objectives that I'll talk to you a little bit more. Thinking about innovation, really focusing on collaboration and that opportunity to drive inclusion. And those three objectives sit at the heart of everything that we do. The next slide brings that to life a little bit more. As we look at the opportunities, if we could move on, please, Heather, to the next slide. Thank you. We have an innovative community within FinTech Scotland, and I've mentioned that number already, really driving forward a significant number of changes and opportunities in financial services. I've drawn some of those specific examples out as we step through this presentation because I wanted to bring this to life for you a little bit further. But in thinking about the cluster and the opportunity across the FinTech Scotland cluster, those small SMEs sit at our heart as we really think about driving that economic opportunity and business growth for those businesses. The majority of those businesses are developing B2B propositions. And so the importance of collaboration and working with the large financial services institutions is vital as we consider those business and route to market opportunities. So strategically, it's important that we, within the cluster in Scotland, are connected to the financial services institutions that are already established. And we're lucky and proud to include Many of those organisations that are working and represented in Scotland, from the large retail banks to the smaller supermarket banks, as well as some of the professional services, pension houses and others that are here to really strengthen Scotland's opportunity in financial services and indeed fintech. What's really important and what we can see as we recognise the positive disrupting influence that fintech presents is the need to think about how we build that inclusive innovation cluster. We do that in a number of ways, and I'll bring some of those examples to life, but we're determined and deliberate about using the word inclusion and inclusivity within our FinTech Scotland cluster. That's working with the academic community, that's working with citizen groups, that's working with the regulator and on policy issues, that's involving the Scottish Government, as well as others, and thinking about our global opportunity for FinTech in Scotland. So I'll move on to the next slide, please, Heather, as I start to really think about some of the technology that's enabling this change. And what I'm hoping to do here is just to bring this to life a little, that these are the technologies that are enabling outcomes and business propositions for our fintech capabilities and fintech SMEs. We have real strength in Scotland growing in machine learning and artificial intelligence, as well as the capabilities in data. It's a real strength in our universities here. Data ethics is something that's very prevalent at the moment, particularly in the University of Edinburgh, and it's a subject that's quite live as we think about those opportunities and those insights connected to open banking in particular, that are really driving forward some fintech innovation. So with that technology development and those opportunities that we see through research and innovation coming through, the fintech application then, enabled by regulation and open banking, we're seeing that really strong in Scotland, is starting to drive some real change and business opportunities. And our strengths in Scotland are connected to open banking, to payments innovation, to RegTech, customer digital transformation, and we're seeing, as you would anticipate, I assume, more focus now on the climate agenda as well. So those fintech innovations on the right-hand side of that slide are starting to come through really, really clearly in our fintech population. If we moved on, please, to the next slide, Heather, this simply brings to life the fintech SME. We categorize this bluntly, if I'm being really honest, because many of these businesses have capability where they could work in a number of different sectors. But this starts to bring to life some of those developing and emerging capabilities. And you can see where we have real strength in the segment wheels, in RegTech and security, in payments innovation, and in personal finance. And we're starting to see some really great innovations in other sectors as well. Distributed ledger technology and cryptocurrency is an interesting area of development for us, as well as institutional tools and that capability to manage change and transition. But I wanted to bring it to life a little bit more for you as we step through some of the specifics. And the next slide starts to pull out some of those fintech innovators who are focused on a number of different themes. So this particular theme is around customer engagement and personal finance. Many of these innovators that you see in these SME businesses around this wheel are driving real change for people through open banking data, through enabling technology and capability, and through thinking through the developments in policy. So if I picked on a few, Castlight is possibly one that you've heard of, using open banking capability to really get to the heart of affordability as we think about the credit journey and understanding somebody's ability to be able to truly afford that loan or that mortgage. Direct ID are doing something very similar, really using open banking capability to get really accurate data directly from somebody's current account to understand that capability in terms of affordability. SOAR is another fantastic example of an innovator in Scotland, again, focused on enabling customer engagement in the credit union sector. And that's another sector that's really starting to think about vulnerability and how it supports vulnerable communities as we engage further, indeed, in the run-up to COVID. Invest is another example of using open banking capability and AI as it thinks about its opportunity to really help people understand how they could maximize their income. And I'll come on to Invest in a moment or two. And then we have other organizations like Nude, which has just launched, and it's a B2C proposition. The others are B2B propositions, but Nude is a B2C proposition to engage customers and consumers directly in helping them save that deposit for a mortgage. So really coming around some very specific problems that people face and trying to find those innovative solutions using data, technology, and open banking. The next slide also then focuses on the other end, if you like, as we think about innovation in capital markets. And we are seeing some real strength come through in our FinTech community there. A couple that I would touch on one is a very new FinTech, CrowdX, as we think about the stock exchange and the future of that innovation and that capability. Level E is another organisation using artificial intelligence born from the University of Edinburgh and really advancing some innovations in the capital market space, as well as organisations like Unlisted and Mark to Market, all using and innovating around data to help build deeper insights into market valuation and those types of necessary capabilities as we think about the capital markets sector and landscape. And Helen specifically asked me to focus on RegTech, and if we moved on to the next slide, I've drawn this out as we think about our innovations in Scotland focused on RegTech. This is a subject that is close to my heart, it's fair to say, as an ex-regulator, having left the FCA at the tail end of January this year. And I'll come on a little bit to the FCA in a moment or two as it really tries to drive forward some innovation in regulatory technology to drive efficiencies in financial services. But you'll see around this wheel that there are a number of innovators who are trying to do exactly that. AutoRec is focused on regulatory reporting and trying to do that more efficiently, recognising the opportunity to use machine learning and AI to help with those regulatory reports that are required. Obashi is another really interesting example, again, connecting with our strengths in Scotland around data, and Obashi's capability is very focused on understanding data flow within a business and where you can see and understand who owns what data and how that plays into the regulatory environment. Amicus is the other business that I draw out here, again focused on regulatory support and access, financial inclusion. In particular focused on financial crime and AML checks to really help ensure that those people who are those checks and balances and compliance needs that you have to meet in a regulatory environment are met through technology and capability. I'm sure there'll be questions with regard to RegTech, and I'll be happy to pick those up as we move into that Q&A section. The next few slides then just start to bring to life that real opportunity to be agile and to think about responding to something quite quickly. And of course, COVID provided a really live stress test, if you like, for that capability. And what we saw as COVID first started to bite this time last year was fintechs really coming around that issue, thinking about people, thinking about businesses, and thinking about how their capability could help in a number of different ways. And the next slide starts to bring some of that to life. So I mentioned Invest already, and Invest started to engage with consumer and citizen groups very quickly to help understand how they could support consumers with first-time benefit applications. So using open banking and helping to understand whether somebody may be eligible for a first-time claim. Their focus was on maximising income for people as opposed to somebody thinking that they needed to turn to debt. So that was one example. Direct ID was another very, very focused on access and helping people maintain access to services when many branches or many of the institutions that they would be used to physically going into were no longer available to them. They used their capability to help ensure people could maintain those access and that important services. As well as others who are really thinking about the connectivity issues and the data issues and that opportunity to help people through that troubled time. We saw quite a lot of innovation in reaction to COVID, as you would expect, and we continue to do that actually. So those section of slides kind of helped, I hope, bring to life that innovative community. And as we move on, please, Heather, to the next slide, or the slide after that, indeed. I'm going to start to focus now a little bit on that collaborative opportunity and the collaborative way of working that we endorse and really help drive forward at FinTech Scotland. And as I said, many of those small SMEs, and indeed whether it's in Scotland or whether it's UK-wide or whether it's global, the FinTech innovators are developing quite a few B2B propositions. They are there to partner and want to work with those larger financial institutions to help advance and drive forward some progressive opportunities. So some examples happening in Scotland I've outlined on the next slide, actually. Thank you, Heather, where we're seeing FinTech partner with the large financial services institution to drive forward change. Virgin Money and Warrigal are one example that's been in the public domain at the tail end of last year, the second half of last year, as we really think about Warrigal's capability in digital customer engagement and how that can help progress capability through mobile. We've seen other advances with Equifax and an organisation called Expand Access. And that opportunity really expands capability to help address some of those issues that people need to see change for. And Amicus, I've already touched on, working with Scottish Government in this case to help with NHS contract workers during COVID. So as more and more people needed to be checked, I guess, as they wanted to increase that workforce, that capability that Amicus had to be able to do those sensitive checks on individuals was vital. So another real example of the agility within FinTech and that ability to think about those cross-sector opportunities. And the next slide then specifically brings to life some of the ways that other strategic partners or financial services institutions for FinTech Scotland are using us as a cluster management organisation. And Lloyds Banking Group has been a fantastic ally and strategic partner for FinTech Scotland, as has NatWest and RBS. Lloyds recently has progressed some of its thinking around its incubator environment, really thinking about some of those issues that they would want to advance as a business, and wanting to connect and partner with fintechs to drive that change. And that's one example of many that we're seeing more progress more and more across the retail banking and banking markets generally. We're seeing these types of, this will not be a surprise, I'm sure, to many of you listening. We're seeing more of those incubator and accelerator environments grow, and that real opportunity for clear problem definition, which is a really important point, real problem definition that allows an innovator to find a solution around. And on the next slide, as we think about that problem definition and that future for a future opportunity, I wanted to mention as well the initiative that with FinTech Scotland and the University of Edinburgh and the general development of the cluster. And this is something that the Khalifa Review also touched on, was the importance of research and innovation and research and development in the fintech, in the future of fintech in the UK, and how we can really think about what might those potential scenarios of 5-10 years look like, and how do we use our academic and research community to help advance that. And we're really privileged in Scotland to have the Global Open Centre of Excellence. I think I forgot the word finance. The Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence hosted here. It was a collaborative opportunity with FinTech Scotland, the University of Edinburgh and FData, and it's been funded through UKRI, one of the UK research and innovation divisions of the UK government. It will help us focus on enterprise innovation. It will help us think about future policy opportunities and future policy insights through access to really clear data. That conversation around ethics and regulatory concerns as we think about how we utilise that type of data, particularly open banking and open finance data, is vital. And the Open Centre of Excellence will also consider, how do we think about interoperability? Something that open banking was really keen on progressing, the consistency of standards, interoperability, and what does technical standards look like as we move on. And I'll be happy to take questions on that. So I've touched, the other aspect in terms of collaboration with FinTech Scotland is how we work with the regulators. And my secondment, I suppose, initially from the FCA into FinTech Scotland was one example, but the FCA more generally is working quite collaboratively as it thinks about innovation in financial services. In particular, the Bank of England and the FCA have been very thoughtful about RegTech. And again, coming back to some of those papers that I'm sure some of you will have read on it, on how it's engaged in the industry on RegTech and the future use of data. Those general themes of standards, reporting, driving forward efficiencies are front of mind. And we're able to take that insight and input from the regulator and help fintech entrepreneurs consider innovations to develop and advance those issues. And it's one thing that we'll be working on quite significantly over the next 12 months in FinTech Scotland as we get behind and put our shoulder to that opportunity of RegTech. But the next slide also then, I just wanted to draw out a few other priorities for innovation and the regulator on the next slide. So we talk about the focus on themes around vulnerable customers, and the FCA's recent paper on customer vulnerability will have been no surprise. The FCA's RegTech sprints and its sandbox calls have focused on that opportunity for wanting to see more innovation to help advance the issues that vulnerable customers face. Financial crime, and I've mentioned Amicus a couple of times, but we're also seeing more innovation to really think about how can the good use of data, technology, and financial services all come together to help really address and tackle financial crime. And the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence that I just touched on will focus on this area as we think about that economic crime issue and how to move that forward. I've touched on RegTech already, and we will also see more work from the regulator this year, as well as in the coming years, and has already started on that move to a greener economy. But specifically later this year, that opportunity to really think about innovation to advance the green economy and the connection between financial services in that space. As we move on to the next slide, and I will stop in a few minutes to make sure we have time for questions. I wanted just to continue that theme on collaboration and to focus on some of the stuff that we'll prioritise in FinTech Scotland, particularly in research and innovation for UK FinTech. And we've collaborated with FinTech Wales on a paper that was published at the beginning of this year, very much focused on that opportunity to really think about the future of financial services and FinTech, and indeed the cross-sector opportunity that FinTech presents as we think about more R&D. And I'm delighted that we will kick off a piece of work for Scotland in developing our research and innovation roadmap as we think about those opportunities and really consider business needs and business priorities to help advance this issue. And in doing so, what we're really hoping to achieve here is to bring that connectivity across the university landscape and financial services and FinTech really more closely aligned. There's been some fantastic work recently, and we want to cement and consolidate that as we move that forward. So I'm going to move on to the final section now and spend a few minutes just talking about inclusion and how we focus on inclusion in FinTech Scotland. And I thought the best way to do that was to bring to life a couple of examples. The next slide talks about our FinTech consumer panel. As you move on to the next slide, thanks Heather, that demonstrates some of the organisations that we've deliberately chose to involve as we think about how FinTech will impact on people and those end consumers and those of us that will use this. Whether a FinTech is developing a B2B proposition, the outcome will touch all of us that uses financial services. And we wanted to make sure that we were using the opportunity that we see FinTech have to develop and advance progressive change for consumers and consumer outcomes, and include consumer organisations in the FinTech Scotland cluster. So those organisations that you see around this slide are involved in that consumer panel, and there are many others that we have the great privilege of talking to on a regular basis. The next slide brings to life some of those examples that beyond the consumer panel and that insight, we then start to see the impact of that connectivity. So Invest, Scottish Government, Step Change and CivTech are one of those collaborative arrangements, if you like, that I've touched on already, where Invest is focused on income maximisation and how it can help people in the most difficult of times. We're also seeing advances in really getting the right support to people and innovators, working with the University of Edinburgh, Soprasteria and Money Advice Scotland to help get the right information to vulnerable customers to help them make the right decision. As well as then that broader financial well-being and the connectivity to the Money and Pension Service UK financial well-being strategy. So those are some specific examples that we have connected FinTech to, and we'll continue to look for those and advance those. as we think about inclusion, the next slide then, we take that more towards that global connectivity and global opportunity that we have with Scotland and with UK FinTech more broadly. So we talk about UK collaboration across the FinTech National Network, and something that the Khalifa Review has pointed to, and indeed the Chancellor this week in his speech at the beginning of FinTech Week, endorsed positively the Centre for Financial Innovation and Technology, the CFIT organisation that Khalifa Review recommended, and the role for that in supporting regional and national connectivity. And we'll be delighted to work and support that as it progresses. But that international connectivity is vital as we think about the market and the opportunity for FinTech and UK FinTech. And we work closely with Scottish Development International and others to progress that opportunity. The final thing I'm going to touch on very briefly as we think about that inclusion is on skills development and the future of skills and people. You'll see on this slide, and I'm happy to share these slides and circulate this, all of the great work that's happening just across Scotland as we think about qualifications, diversity, skills for the future. We think about accelerators, business skills, business opportunities, and how we really support that people development across the FinTech Scotland cluster. And the final couple of points I wanted just to mention on the next slide is the importance that we see in connecting to policy. I've touched on the UK Treasury Review, the Khalifa Review, periodically throughout the evening, and that was something we were heavily engaged in as that progressed, to understand the FinTech sector across the UK and then to think about recommendations. And indeed, some of that connectivity and recommendations around R&D was driven by some of the work that FinTech Scotland and FinTech Wales had already done. The FCA, Innovate UK, our whole host of others as we think about that opportunity to influence and share real experience around policy development. And we'll hear more from the Scottish Government as it thinks about the tech opportunity and economic opportunity in the tech ecosystem review that was led by Mark Logan, that we'll also contribute to. Finally, as we think about inclusion, I did want to just touch on the next slide, that kind of opportunity really to think about cross-sector approach for FinTech. We are, particularly in the RegTech space, actually, we are seeing more and more innovations that are able to meet compliance obligations in another sector, such as health, such as oil and gas, such as the energy sector, and take that technology and start to think about how they would apply that to financial services. And we'll see more and more of that. So as we think about those opportunities for FinTech, we are casting our net and looking to other sectors where there's real capability and technology developing that could be applied within the financial services sphere. And I think I'm going to just pause there, finally mentioning the FinTech Scotland Festival, which is our next slide in September. And please keep an eye out for that, and we'll be delighted to see you at some of those events. We're planning that at the moment. And what I've taken you through there, and stopping to make sure we have time for questions in that final slide, as we come back to those 3 circles that outlined our objectives, that final slide just summarises that this is Scotland's FinTech cluster. Thank you very much. I think I'm handing back now.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Nicola. Firstly, I'm sure everyone on the call this evening will join me in thanking you for your time this evening. For those of you that don't know, this week is actually UK FinTech Week, so we really appreciate you taking your time out of your evening, as doubtless you'll have been busy this week, or particularly busy this week. It really was great to hear exactly what FinTech Scotland do, what your purpose is, and how you're working with the regulators to achieve your aims. Unsurprisingly, there's quite a few questions that have come in throughout the call. So if you don't mind, I think I'll just crack on with those.
Okay.
So the first question I have is from one of our committee members, Rory McIntyre. His question is, I work in a technology recruitment resourcing role, and we continually see tech roles being strategically approved for typically cheaper locations such as India or Poland. Do you foresee the supply of skills through Scotland's vast network of universities and colleges potentially disrupting this?
That's a brilliant question, Rory, and we're really, really pleased actually to see progress across the universities in Scotland as it thinks about the opportunity for skills. And I think that one of those last slides hopefully brought some of that to life for you. So in particular, the University of Strathclyde, University of Glasgow, University of Edinburgh, Stirling and Aberdeen all have FinTech MSc programmes that are running and available. And those organisations as well are thinking about CPD and executive education and that opportunity to upskill and reskill. So we're certainly starting to see more of that. And then we have organisations like the Data Lab in Scotland who are very focused on the skills agenda and how we can really nurture that tech capability and place those students coming through from those programmes across the financial services sector and other sectors. So there's real weight behind Scotland's intent on skills, and the Mark Logan report, or the Scottish Technology Ecosystem Review that I just touched on there laterally, is very focused on the future of skills, right the way through to grassroots and how we address that at primary school level, so that we think about the next generation of skills coming through. So we have a real range of specific actions that are happening here and now to address the upskilling, reskilling and our graduate recruitment, as well as how do we build a better pipeline for talent through the Mark Logan Review and through our schools programme that Skills Development Scotland are supporting.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. You've actually answered the next question there, or you've touched on it rather. The sort of question was, it's great to hear about the initiative with the University of Edinburgh and the relationship with other universities in general. Is there anything being done about trying to target secondary school pupils to encourage them into a FinTech career, given the expansion to the courses available?
So I think it's fair to say that we could do more here, and that is it's high on our thinking at the moment. There are a number of different initiatives that some of the strategic partners in FinTech Scotland are working on. Deloitte, as an example, have engaged and developed an app that helps school children start to engage in the subject of technology and how it could be applied within the financial services sector, which I think is a fantastic advancement, particularly as we think about the opportunity to engage more girls and more women in FinTech and in tech and financial services. We are very aware that there is a diversity issue there still within our schools, and we need to do what we can to address that. So we're working with Skills Development Scotland on that specifically as to how we think about those grassroots issues. The Mark Logan report, as I've touched on, also addresses this, and the Scottish Government have committed to supporting all of the recommendations from the Logan Review. So I expect to see more here.
Excellent. So the next question I have is actually from Helen Mackay. And she's asking, how do you view Scotland as a hub for FinTech, and what have we been missing, or what have we as a nation that differentiates us from other leading FinTech nations like Singapore, Sweden or the US?
So not just taking my word for it, because I suppose I might be a little biased, But the Khalifa Review has very clearly signposted that Scotland has real strategic strength in fintech. So to be identified as one of the top 3 fintech destinations across the UK is significant, considering that London is the top spot. So we've really helped to progress that, and FinTech Scotland as a cluster management organisation has just helped to facilitate that, to take that forward, and to profile, really strongly profile that fantastic capability right across Scotland. Scotland has some really strong foundations as we think about the components that are needed to help us advance fintech. So the financial services heritage and that real depth of financial services in Scotland is paramount here, and the fact that we still have access to that, and that continues to grow from strength to strength, will support fintech innovation and fintech development. The technology capability is the second component on that, Gregor, and then the universities that we have, and that access to research and innovation is vital. And the fact that we have regulatory presence in Scotland also helps. So the FCA and the CMA now are represented in Scotland, and the FCA, of course, has been represented in Scotland for quite a long time. Where Scotland really benefits is its size, and it's often referred to as that Goldilocks nation, where the size is just right, and that ability to connect and to work and to be connected, to speak to people who can connect you is vital, and that's a vital part of our role at FinTech Scotland. Where we have more to do is as we think about the investment that's needed for fintech SMEs and fintech businesses, and to connect that investment community that is predominantly London-based, and to encourage them to look beyond London across the regions of the UK, so that we can attract that funding that's needed to help those SMEs progress and develop. And I think we'll work to address that. I think, though, that kind of helps us really understand the component parts that are needed to help us drive that fintech sector.
Excellent. Next question here is, do you think that some of the fintech businesses would have scaled up as quickly had there been no pandemic?
So I think it's a really interesting question, actually. I think through COVID, we certainly started to see digital accelerate, that is for sure. And the fact that we have many B2B businesses within the fintech community in Scotland was a real strength. We were able to connect those in with financial services institutions to help advance that. So I think it has certainly helped. We've only seen 1 or 2 fintechs have to pause or stop. The pandemic, though, has also impacted some of those fintech businesses, like others, where 1 or 2 have stopped completely, others have had to pause, as I say. So there's been a real mixture, actually, but inevitably, I think what COVID has done is it's just crystallized that thinking that we're moving more and more towards a digital approach and a digital economy. But it's also highlighted where we need to focus our attention to make sure that people aren't left behind. And as we think now about our recovery, and we think about the future economy, and the role technology, data and digital will play in that, will all add to that capability for fintech innovation.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think it's something that I've noticed in the private banking world, is that the pandemic has certainly increased clients' trust in technology. I think people, prior to the pandemic, were always a bit wary. But I think now, there's a bit more trust there, which is a good thing. I've got another question here from Rory. and I'm just going to crack on with that now. So in relation to larger organisations, a lot of technology costs are to third-party suppliers, either for workers with a certain skill or to procure a service from a particular supplier. Do you foresee larger organisations with a significant presence in Scotland moving towards acquiring smaller fintech companies and potentially increasing their permanent workforce, given that technology will be required going forward?
Okay, yeah, so Rory, I think what we're seeing more and more is that partnership model, where those large financial services institutions are keen to partner with a fintech or with a smaller and potentially an organisation that can bring a bit of agility into the operation. So I think we'll see more and more of those partnerships as we progress, and that might lead to them acquiring that position. But yeah, I think we'll see more and more of those partnerships.
Okay, I've got a question here from Darren Cairns. Darren's asking, the FCA rightly have a real drive on culture and financial services. How do we ensure that morals, ethics and good practice, not just adhering to regulation, are at the heart of how we support emerging fintechs, some of whom have big commercial and valuation goals and less knowledge of previous industry mistakes?
It's a great question, Darren. And I think we have a responsibility, particularly those who have worked in financial services for a while, to share those lessons and to bring that to life for people. I think my personal experience of the fintech community in Scotland is that they're very thoughtful about regulation. They're very mindful of outcomes and focused on impact. And we're seeing more and more of those businesses really consider purpose, impact, and sustainability. And I think we'll see more people and consumers demand that, which will also be a good thing. So that, coupled with the fact that we will do more around the subject of data ethics and how we really think about trust, to use your word, Gregor, trust in using data and bringing consumers and citizens with us on that journey, and the likes of the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence and our academic community that are neutral and a trusted environment in this space will help us do that. I think we need to embrace those independent organisations to help us do some of that thinking. And I think we'll see more of this from the regulator, both FCA and the Bank of England, and indeed the CMA, as it starts to think about that vulnerability agenda. And we see fintech work across different sectors. There will be other regulators that will have a role to play here, the ICO as well. I don't know, Darren, if that answers your question.
Okay, got one more question here. This is again from Helen Kai. She's saying, so peer-to-peer regulation had just been introduced by the FCA when Lending Crowd started. However, it was very important to us to meet the regulatory requirements from the very start. Do you think other fintechs were surprised that they may need to meet regulatory requirements, or the extent of those requirements?
So I think my experience is that we're seeing more and more innovation, and those innovators are aware of regulatory requirements. They're aware of the regulations and the need to consider regulation. What we've been working on at FinTech Scotland is trying to help people understand to think about that a little bit earlier in the journey, and indeed then the potential length of time that it might take, particularly if they need to be authorised. So we've had a couple of specific initiatives where we've been inviting the FCA in to speak to the fintech community and do that Reg 101 type opportunity to really bring to life the role of the regulator, what it feels like to be supervised, what that authorization process might look like, to help people understand what responsibilities they may need to consider, as well as time and investment. So I think, Helen, to answer your question, there's a really mixed experience here. What's fantastic about FinTech is that we're seeing innovations come through from people who haven't necessarily, to use an expression that my father might use, been born and bred in the financial services industry. They're new to this, they're bringing in new thinking, new diversity, and I think that's to be encouraged. But with somebody entering into a new field, they just need to be helped to understand what those responsibilities might look like, and we're doing some of that. And then the FCA, of course, I think recognises this too, which is part of the reason they've set up their Project Innovate and the innovation division within the FCA, where the sandbox, the direct advice unit, as well as other services and activities are there to help people who have ambition in this space understand what those responsibilities might be.
Well, thanks very much, Nicola. I'm just conscious of time. There are a few other questions still there, so apologies that we've not got around to them all. You know, thanks very much from me, and what I'll do now is I'll pass you over to Helen just to close off. But thanks very much for your time today, Nicola.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gregor, for hosting that little session there. And thank you very much to Nicola for taking the time out to talk to us tonight. For someone that used to be in the banking world and moved across to FinTech, it's been really interesting listening to what Nicola has to say, and I think it'll maybe surprise a lot of bankers out there what's going on in Scotland in particular. There's companies there that you just hear names and then you suddenly realise that they're Scottish, and you know, that they're good, solid companies that can help support the banks in achieving their goals. And I think that could be a revelation to a lot of people. So for this counts as a CPD event for tonight. You'll be able to claim for an hour, and the local district committee would just like to thank everyone for taking their time to attend our events over the last few months. It's been a bit of a different time, a break for the summer, but we'd like to, we're looking at potential events from September onwards, and we'll continue to do them online, so they'll be open to the wider membership as we have been doing. But we're quite interested to take suggestions for potential events. Anybody that would like to be a speaker, that's got an idea that they would like to share, then please contact us, either any of us in the committee through LinkedIn or through the Chartered Banker Institute. They'll be able to put you in touch with me. And remember that for local members, we have our own LinkedIn group, which will continue to post some interesting facts over the summer. So please submit a request to join. So I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Heather at the Institute, as ever, for all your help and support, especially over the last few events that you've put on for us, and all the advertising. Gregor from the committee for hosting the Q&A session, and obviously big thank you to Nicola for taking her time out, and we'll hopefully be able to take up your offer of doing a face-to-face event when things return to some sort of normality. Thank you, everyone.